We are down to review number 49, and that's will be my last review on Ezekiel. The effect of living water flowing from Jerusalem has, what it has done to the land of Israel, was the topic of last time. In Jesus' day, he had spiritualized living water to the Samaritan woman, if you remember. And that did not concern the spring water that was under Jerusalem. That was not his topic. But now we find Ezekiel, who 500 years before, being confronted with that spring water as being more than destined for man's thirst. But truly it says in Zechariah, living water. Zechariah 8 calls it living water. So this water that we studied last week is living water. And it brings to us some ideas that we studied last week that were really kind of exciting. Living water for both the flora and the fauna is on both banks of the river as it flowed toward the Jordan. All of that country that is arid and looks like out here west of Delta, all of a sudden becomes full of trees, full of fruit year round. And leaves upon them, on that fruit. So Ezekiel's made to see this small trickle of water coming from under the temple, increasingly magnified as it flowed east toward the Jordan Valley. You remember, within a mile and a half, it became impossible to walk across it. From the bank of that river, you beheld the many trees, and most certainly the year-round fruit, whose source, whose leaves also gave rise to the millennial pharmacy to heal. It says this is the leaves were a pharmacy to heal. And if that means what I read, it may be that it's destined for the fleshly human bodies, right? For indeed, the majority of those people in the millennium, as we would understand it, are probably still in the fleshly body. The minority is in the spiritual body. And we need to kind of comprehend it that way, I believe. But how does this water replace the most salty brine of the Dead Sea, which is 6 times more salty than the ocean? When centuries of great flows of fresh water from the Jordan River has never made it fresh. Miraculously, fresh or healed so that many fish can live there, providing for a robust fishing industry. And how can swamps and marshes that we see in verse 11 of chapter 47 remain unchanged and not contaminate the fresh living waters with their salt? Chapter 47 then describes the boundaries of the promised land. We find that the boundaries of today's Israel is not the boundaries of the promised land given unto Abraham. And so the internal division within the tribal lands as gifted by promise to Abraham are made aware to us through Ezekiel's prophecy. It reads as if the diasporic Jews made captive by Assyria and Babylon, now being resurrected or brought from the north and the east to be the first to settle, before the southern lands are occupied, just the reverse of Joshua's day, which started at the south and moved north. Boundaries are established by the known cities of that era, and it gives a list of those cities, some of which we cannot locate today. An interesting insertion is found in the last 2 verses, 22 and 23, about aliens. That meaning in the Hebrew translation, strangers or non-natives to Israel, to the land of Israel. They are being allowed to stay and be granted birthright citizenship as concerning an inheritance of that land that is within Israel. That's really interesting. We in this light must see the prophecy that was given to Isaiah, and I want to read that prophecy from Isaiah 2. so that we understand that the message even predated Ezekiel by 1,500 years. And this is the prophecy that we hear from Isaiah 2. I'll read just the first 3 verses. The word which Isaiah the son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Now we're looking right at Judah and Jerusalem, which is really the topic all the way through Ezekiel. We were not looking at the northern 12 tribes, 10 tribes. We were looking at the 2 tribes of Judah. Now it will come about in that last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains and will be raised above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. And many peoples will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, that is Zion, to the house of God of Jacob, that he may teach us concerning his ways, and that we walk in his paths. For the law will go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So indeed, in the day of the prophecy of Isaiah and Ezekiel and on into Zechariah, which we soon will approach, we come to see how aliens' behavior has and will be modified. They also will seek after Yahweh. After all, Yahweh is a tetragram, is it not? Behold the nail, behold the hand. Today's lesson is in Ezekiel 48, and the first readings of it, it's in many verses will be read fairly quickly for you, because they're almost a rehearsal of what we've studied, and they'll be condensed a little bit so we understand a few more tidbits about it. But for the most part, it's a lot of review real quickly that God gave unto Ezekiel, and he wouldn't give this review if it wasn't emphatic. I think anytime you find the repetition coming, you have to understand God's trying to make the point. Make it clear to those who are listeners to what Ezekiel had to say. So chapter 48 does not follow the design of tribal distribution as under Joshua. We'll read that. We're going to find out what the fullness of the land is occupied by when it's partitioned off among the 12 tribes. All portions are parallel to one another, 7 to the north and 5 to the south of that special select land called the Lord's land that we saw in the middle, and we're going to be using it to look at this for the final time, probably looking at these drawings a little more closely than we've looked at it heretofore. The central allotment between these two it is set apart for the temple, its priests, its prince, and there's also some space for the city. We're going to look at the city a little more closely. We know that this city is given public access to all Israel. It's not select for any one tribe. It's given to all Israel. So from 48:1-7, we read these words, and I'll read them fairly quickly, and you'll see that it brings back memory for you. Now these are the names of the tribes from the northern extremity by the way of Hethlon to Lebo-Hamath, as far as Hazarnan at the borders of Damascus toward the north. Besides Hamath running from east to west, Dan one portion, and beside the border of Dan from the east side to the west side and to the south thereof is Asher one portion. And beside the border of Asher and from the east side to the west side, Naphtali one portion, and beside the border of Naphtali to the east to the west side, Manasseh one portion, and beside the border of Manasseh from the east side to the west side, Ephraim one portion, and beside the border of Ephraim from the east side to the west side, Reuben one portion, and beside the border of Reuben from the east side to the west side, Judah one portion. And I'll stop there just for the moment. If you take out this one, you'll see it listed right down just as I read it. And all of a sudden, as you get to Judah, whoops, it's interrupted by the central portion. And we've studied the central portion in chapter 45 enough to know a little bit about it. We won't add a whole lot to it except to understand the city a little better, because we've also studied the priest's role in the temple area. We've studied the temple and its foundations very well. But we're going to be doing that. And so as I read my notes by way of summary to just what I read, these verses describe the northernmost boundaries given to Daniel, and then successive portions to Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Ephraim, Reuben, and Judah. Judah's the southern border is the northern border of the space that was set apart for the Lord. Okay, as you look at this picture, you can see this little center portion. This is set apart for the Lord. Okay, the Lord is claiming this land. We will see first fruits. It echoes to first fruits. How do we understand this? Well, none of these lands are given a calculated physical measurement except for the holy portion. We've studied a great deal of that. We first visited that in chapter 45, verses 1 to 6. Now as we read verses 8 and 9, we read this: "And beside the border of Judah, from the east side to the west side, shall be an allotment which shall be set apart 8 1/3 miles in width and in length, like one of the portions from the east side to the west side. And the sanctuary shall be in the middle of it. The allotment that you shall set apart to the Lord shall be 25,000 cubits in length and 10,000 cubits in width, meaning 8 1/3 miles long and 3.5 miles wide." And that describes the portion that was given to the Zadok priests. And if you look at that blow up, you can see the priest portion with the sanctuary in the center of it. That's revealed for you. It's being restated here. And so as I read and summarize verses 8 and 9, much attention is given to this central portion. Its internal boundaries are specifically measured starting with the temple complex. The temple complex within an area of 8 1/3 miles long and 3 1/3 miles wide, called the priest's portion in your drawings. Verses 10 to 14, and the holy allotment shall be for these, namely the priests. We're knowing that to be naming the Zadok family out of the Levitical tribe. Toward the north, 8 1/3 miles, and to the west, 3 1/3 miles toward the east in width, and toward the south. So north and south of that, you have on the north side the Levitical portion, on the south side the city portion. And the sanctuary of the Lord shall be in its midst. It shall be for the priests who are sanctified of the sons of Zadok, who have kept my charge, who do not go astray when the sons of Israel went astray, as the Levites went astray. So the greater Levitical tribe, you remember, was described as being in that northern portion of 8 1/3 miles by 3.3 miles. And what did they have there? It described it as they occupying cities. The Zadok portion, they occupied what? Houses. Meaning, as we would understand it, you've got scattered houses in the Zadok portion because there aren't very many of them. But you've got many, many Levitical priests who are now just perfunctory ministers of the outer court in the temple arena. They no longer can go into the holy place. They have profaned their work. And they've been judged with a curse. Now, when God curses, that doesn't mean he throws them into hell. But he takes away their privilege. And it shall be an allotment to them from the allotment of the land, a most holy place by the border of the Levites. And alongside the border of the priests, the Levites shall have 25,000 cubits and 10,000 in width. The whole length shall be 25 1,000 cubits and the width 10,000. Moreover, they shall not sell or exchange any of it, or alienate this choice portion of land, for it is holy to the Lord. So as we read verses 10 to 14, the bordering of the Levite lands to the north of the Zadok strip of the sons of Zadok, and because of their faithfulness, they have been assigned a ministry within the sanctuary, which is also within their lands. So God places this sanctuary in the millennium right in the middle of the Zadok portion. And he calls it most holy in this regard. It's a holy allotment. It's their holy allotment. Verses 10 to 12. To the north, sandwiched between the southern border of Judah and the northern border that was given to the sons of Zadok, lies an identical 8.5 or 8 1/3 mile long by 3 1/3 mile wide strip set aside for Levites, whose houses, or who because of their unfaithfulness do not have access to the sanctuary within the temple complex. I've just repeated myself, sorry. These lands are holy to the Lord, it says in verse 14, and by literal interpretation, they are in the Hebrew called first fruits. I think that's an interesting concept because it takes us back to the understanding of what the land of Israel was to do with their harvest. What were they to do? They were to take the first fruits of their harvest and present it to the Lord as a gift of worship. Okay? Here, that's being said in the same way about the lands. These lands are set apart as holy to the Lord, allowing the Levitical tribes to be split with the family of Zadok to the south and the rest of them to the north. And these are called first fruit lands. They can't be sold or exchanged because they're given to the Lord. In anticipation of a harvest of souls in this worship place. Do you picture that? In the beginning, when the Israelites gave of their harvest in worship, what was it? It was part of a worship that would also guarantee them the harvest to come. Okay? Here it is, the land which is holy to the Lord, set aside for the Levitical peoples, is also to be used as a first fruit offering to God of the land. The rest of the land, therefore, being guaranteed as part of the harvest. So everything north and south, the greater portion of Israel in that day, is the harvest. And the harvest portrays not just occupation. It portrays the worship that is going on in a life of a people that is still in the flesh. Their heart has been renewed. They've been given the Holy Spirit within, and they come and they are obedient to the worship that was set up in the days of the first covenant, which was a conditional covenant, which was defiled by them, no longer to be defiled. They will come in and in imperfect worship to that original covenant. They will learn what sin is all about. They will recognize sin. They won't be wishy-washy about all the gray stuff, whether this is sin or not sin. I think the picture is being drawn very strongly here onto that issue. Now we get a little more interesting thoughts because we move into stuff that we haven't totally studied before. And first, we have to look briefly at the prince's portion that expands beyond this central area where the priests and where the temple are and where the city of Jerusalem is reestablished, to the prince's portion once more. in verses 21 and 22, and the remainder shall be for the prince on the one side and on the other of the holy allotment, and a little property of the city in front of 25,000 cubits of the allotment toward the east border, and westward in front of the 25,000 toward the west. Along the portions it shall be for the prince, and the holy allotment and the sanctuary of the house shall be in the middle of it. There is no way that the prince's land is called Holy Land. Don't look at it that way. It is not part of the first fruits. And so you're reading that verse, and then verse 22, and exclusive of the property of the Levites and the property of the city, which are in the middle of that which belongs to the prince, everything between the border of Judah and the border of Benjamin to the south shall be for the prince. It defines it pretty well in terms of summary. The prince's portion is 8 1/3 miles wide, bordered to the north by Judah and to the south by Benjamin, broken in the middle by the 8 1/3 mile square of the temple complex. Remember that this whole complex that you're looking at here in the blown up drawing is 8 1/3 miles square. Everything is a square upon a square upon a square, constantly, in terms of the descriptions that are given. The detail of these two verses really is in context to everything we studied up to verse 20, from verse 8 to verse 20. Now as we look at verses 23 to 29. This is the other portion. We're looking at the southern portion of these 5 tribes that are south of this central portion. We gave you a list of those to the north. There were 7. Now there's a list of 5 to the south. These last 5 tribes from Benjamin going south: Simeon, Issachar, Zebulun, and Gad. In Gad's portion, in the southern, the most southern of all the tribes, its border is pretty well defined. You didn't find much definition, except when you started at Dan, there was a little definition, and when you get to Gad, there's a little bit of definition of borders, more so than any of the other tribes. The other tribes are just told that they extend east and west, parallel to one another. Doesn't define their size, but they're a lot bigger than what it is today, I'll guarantee you. As we look at the city, there's something kind of interesting comes out of this as we study the city. And as we conclude Ezekiel, we get a pretty good picture of the new city of Jerusalem. And it says in verse 30 up to 34 these words, and these are the exits of the city. On the north side, 1.5 miles by measurement, 4,500 cubits in other words, shall be the gates of the city named for the tribes of Israel. 3 gates toward the north, the gate of Reuben, 1 gate, 1, the gate of Judah, 1, the gate of Levi, 1. So there's a collection of 3. Is it beginning to bring back memories of the past? What was happening in the temple in the wilderness? In the tabernacle, I should say. 3 tribes in 4 locations around it, right? Established. This is what you're hearing here. Verse 32, and on the east side, 4,500 cubits, again, we're looking at a square, shall be 3 gates, the gate of Joseph, 1. Now, Joseph is represented in the 12 tribes by whom? Ephraim and Manasseh, his sons. 1 gate, the gate of Benjamin, 1, the gate of Dan, 1. And on the south side, 4,500 cubits, shall be 3 gates, the gate of Simeon, 1, the gate of Issachar, 1, the gate of Zebulun, 1. On the west side, 4,500 cubits, shall be 3 gates, the gate of Gad, 1, the gate of Asher, 1, the gate of Naphtali, 1. You get the issue. You get the feel for what's going on here. So God has a plan for the city of 1.5 miles square beyond its common use, which is in quotes in verse 15 of chapter 48. Attention is drawn to observe its gates, 3 on each side, named for the tribes of Israel. This is a prototype of what was repeated on the gates of the eternal city to come in the New Jerusalem. It's going to be like that when the New Jerusalem opens up. These 3s are in 4 sections will be like that. What does that tell us about what we remember when we get to the New Jerusalem? Only the things that God has done that really count. Remember what I did with the 12 tribes. What's on the stones in the New Jerusalem? The apostles' names. Remember what they did. And there's nothing else to tell us about our past, except for the river that comes out of the holy city, the New Jerusalem. It will also have that trees that liken to the river that comes out in the millennium from the temple. It will be trees that give forth their fruit down the line.
But there's no temple in the New Jerusalem.
But there's no temple in the New Jerusalem. But it flows out from New Jerusalem. And New Jerusalem apparently doesn't have any walls in it. You're probably going to be able to see everything in it, even though it's monstrous. God will not be hidden. There'll be no shame, there'll be no guilt. Boy, I just don't know how eternity is going to affect me. I just cannot process that I can live for eternity in boredom. Not when God's around. Anyway, enough of that. That's off on a limb. As we looked at verses 30 to 34, God had a plan for the city of 1.5 square miles beyond its common use, and attention is drawn to observe its gates, 3 on each side, named for the tribes of Israel. Verse 31. This is a prototype of what was repeated on the gates of the eternal city. And the city is described here as having a circumference of 6 miles. If you add up 1.5, 1.5, and 1.5, you come out with 6. So its circumference is 6 miles. In verse 35, in the concluding verse of the whole book, the city shall be that size, a circumference of 6 miles, round about. And the name of the city from that day shall be, the Lord is there. That means Yahweh Shema. The Lord is there. Ezekiel had in chapters 10 and 11 described the departing glory of God from Solomon's temple in the heart of Jerusalem. And that was in conjunction with the city's coming judgment by God upon Jerusalem, which the sword of Nebuchadnezzar brought. Now he visits the return of God's glory in the millennial temple, which sits outside the city's boundaries, but is nevertheless a blessed city, a most blessed city given unto Israel. And the name of the city from that day forward shall be Yahweh Shema. The Lord is there. Now I'll ask you a question just because I'm prone to vain imagination also. Will not the spoken language in the millennium be Hebrew? I can only wonder. For I do see a people in the millennium that can converse with one another. Tribal tongue differences, I don't think, are going away anywhere. There's going to be restoration to the time before Nimrod. I think we see a people who are able to communicate with God rightly. And he will communicate with them. And everybody will understand. In this day and age, we have a terrible time. We spend buku time in interpreting the Bible in other languages. I don't think that's going to be around when that time comes. I'm just wandering in my mind. But I wonder not to conclude the Ezekiel with my wandering. I want you to understand what Ezekiel has given unto that exiled group of people in Babylon. I want you to understand that while they were exiled in Babylon, they were made rich. The prosperity of Babylon, when Nebuchadnezzar was yanked by his short hairs and came to know the Lord, he built a magnificent kingdom for a short while. It's described elsewhere in Daniel and other places that we were looking at a kingdom that had been revived, if it were, because it was becoming more holy unto justice, where before it was very unjust under him. He was very unjust. It took a lot for God to break him. How would you like to spend your time on your hands and knees eating grass? It took a lot to break Nebuchadnezzar. But the exiles in Babylon, they had a good life. And many of them didn't want to go back. And many of them didn't. Many of them didn't go back. A bulk of them came back in the day of Jesus. They came back as what? Zealots. What were they after? They were after Rome's throat. And they came back and waged war against Rome. How well did that work out? Well, anyway, enough of that. But I want to give you a prelude to end time wars, because it brings to focus what Ezekiel told us about the war of Gog and Magog. And as we move into Zechariah, we're going to focus on Armageddon, along with what we know about from our studies in Revelation 16. And so I wanted to voice a few things about that for today's conclusion to the beginning of a new book that we will begin next week in full earnesty. Ezekiel in chapters 38 and 39 have introduced us to a near coming war of an Islamic confederation, and I put in parentheses, unknown to Ezekiel, for it was birthed in the 6th century AD. He was receiving this information 500 BC. We're talking almost 1,000 years gap. But he was talking about something that was coming that he could not name. We can name it. Because every one of the 5 nation states that he named are what? Islamic. So, he didn't identify these 5 nation states under the name we would know them as Islamic nations. He named them as Gog and Magog. And they're identified today from southwest Russia, Turkey, Iran, Libya, which is also called Put, and Ethiopia and Sudan, which are known as Kush. And we can identify those nation states today. And we know that their preoccupation is the heart of Islam. Hardcore Islam. And so the Islamic enemies are listed for us by Ezekiel, and he couldn't call them a name. Their ambition is to take a spoil from a peaceful, prosperous Israel, and in doing so, they are confronted and destroyed by God on Israel's mountains. It's said from one passage of Scripture that only a sixth of them will ever return home. There's a lot of destruction in the war of Gog and Magog. Gog and Magog are destroyed totally. Now, if you're destroying Islam, what's left? Maybe that's the reason why the temple gets rebuilt. Suppose? Anyway. The timeline is best set after the church has been raptured and just prior to the 7 years reign of the Antichrist, who co-opts the third temple that is built in Jerusalem. Right? When was the first temple destroyed? 586 BC. When was the second temple destroyed? 70 AD by Rome. When is the third temple arising? In the day of the Antichrist. When is it destroyed? When the Lord comes again and puts his foot on earth. When he comes for the church, he does not put his foot on earth. He calls from the clouds, a trumpet call to those who are the saints, both dead and alive, takes them home, gives them a new spiritual body, returns with them. Okay, kind of keeping that in our minds. The Antichrist has an international rule that's beyond Israel, beyond the city of Jerusalem. After all, he arises out of and from and takes over a weak 10-nation confederacy that Daniel and John the Revelator have identified as the revived Roman Empire. The 10 toes of clay and iron of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. It's all tied together. Trying to keep it all in perspective. Difficult. At the end of the 7-year tribulation, a vast army out of the east, 200 million strong, will join with the armies from the south that Daniel 11 verses 40 to 44 talk about, and other unnamed peoples of the world to battle the corrupted kingdom of the Antichrist. Now I have to be careful here. You cannot get together 200 million man army and muster them. The logistics is impossible. We just can't think of that. What does it tell us about this 200 million strong? They are described as demons. Maybe not men. Keep that in mind. I can't sit here and say that I know that that's for sure. I've been taught for years and years there's a 200 million man army. And China has got to be the one that has to do it. Who got that idea? Who promoted that in the first place? If you really start studying chapter 9 of Revelation, the language doesn't speak that way. Are you with me? Okay. So, having said that, they will congregate at Har Megiddo. Where's Har Megiddo? What does that mean? What does Har mean? It means mountain of. Mountain of Megiddo. Megiddo means in Hebrew slaughter. What's gone on here? There's been more slaughter in Israel over the centuries at Har Megiddo than any other place in Israel. Gideon, Barak, King Josiah, killed by the Egyptians there. There's a lot of them. The battle we call Armageddon, and it's briefly described. It's described in Zechariah 14, which we'll get to down there somewhere. And also we read about it in Revelation 16. These armies are drawn by demonic force, for it is purposed in God's plan to interdict their attack on Jerusalem by the arrival of King Jesus to establish his rule. He will act deposing Satan to the abyss at that time. He will throw Satan to the abyss, not to hell, throws him to the abyss. And he's chained for how long? 1,000 years. And when he's released, what does he do? He gathers together all the unbelievers, and it says multitude thereof, to wage war against the king who sits on the throne, Messiah. Right? And we don't hear how that goes, except it goes quick. Because it opens the next chapter to the great white throne judgment. What is that war called? We've seen the type now that's coming by Ezekiel 38, 39. What's the antitype? Give me the words. Gog and Magog. The same words are used. One is localized to Israel. The other is worldwide and is the greater one. Scriptures are constantly full of type and antitype. And here's one of those times when you can see that. So Satan is thrown into the abyss for 1,000 years, and the Antichrist and the false prophet, what do they get? They get the full curse and wrath of God. They are cast where? Into the lake of fire. Who are the first persons that enter the lake of fire?
Antichrist and the false prophet.
The Antichrist and the false prophet. Never to be heard of again. Nevertheless, during all of this war, 1/3 of all mankind will be killed by these armies, as Revelation 9 tells us. And the armies themselves killed with the sword which comes from the mouth of him, meaning Christ, the Messiah, the King of Kings, and the Lord of Lords. Revelation 19, verses 16 and 21. In the battle at Armageddon, how much blood is spilled? And you're talking about 200 million. And here's where I get myself into a quandary about demonic army. Do demons have blood? Men have blood. But they're demonic men. So they're mustered by Satan, not by human mustering. God calls them forth and prepares their pathway. Part of that is drying up of the Euphrates River. Demons don't need to have bridges over the Euphrates. They can walk over whether it's got water in it or not. But men can't. So I get confused, where this 200 million man army that's demonically driven and controlled and called by God to come to Armageddon, where God takes out in the hand of his Messiah. And his Messiah is seen as what? Blood on his white robe, all the way from the south of Israel to the north. In fact, it's in the valley of Jehoshaphat, 200 miles long, that the blood shall run to the depth of a horse's bridle. That's a lot of blood. That's a lot of blood. Well, the prophecies of Ezekiel and Zechariah are separated by 50 years. So as we move into Zechariah, which means God remembers, that's his name. We're going to be looking at the longest book of the 12 minor prophets. And it sees Zechariah along with Haggai as post-exilic prophets. Zechariah was born in Babylon, and he served as a priest among the exiles. And he returned to Jerusalem with the first 50,000 exiles that were liberated by Cyrus, the Medo-Persian king at that time. This after 70 years of captivity of the people in Babylon. So the beginning of the return of the people to the land begins. They went forth, I'm sure, just excited as peas in a pod. But when they arrived on the mountain of Israel, it was destitution and desolation and enemies in their face. So how is the prophecies of Ezekiel about the glory that is to come going to be perceived by those people who first come? What did Ezekiel say they were like? He said they were like people who had nothing but immature thoughts. They were infantile in their understanding. And they were not motivated to continue to do that which they went to do because they saw it as overwhelming. They just couldn't do it. So along comes God's prophets. And God's prophets, namely here Zechariah, where we read about most of it, what did they do to these 50,000 who were stagnating in this desolate land? They'd reached their goal, but they were stagnating. They started to build the foundation, and then they were swayed away. And so Zerubbabel, Joshua, the priest, they couldn't incite them to continue. So along comes Zechariah. And it's kind of interesting how Zechariah deals with them. God always uses his prophets in a very marvelous way. We thought Ezekiel was a good book. I hope you did. I hope you find Zechariah likewise. And so next week we'll get into Zechariah. I'll give you a brief prologue to the book itself, and then we'll dive into the first chapter. The chapter that I'm going to start with is chapter 8, and I'll give you a reason for that when we get there. I don't want to go any further, because then I have to explain it. I don't think we have time for that. So let's stand for a closing word of prayer. Father, you have graced us with your word over this last year through Ezekiel's eyes. We've seen something about the millennium, learned things about the millennium that we never knew before. But you were so precise and so good to give unto Ezekiel a most perfect view of how you turned a people who were wayward into a people that were obedient. And oh Lord, bless them. It's always been your long suffering, Lord, that we don't look at correctly. You are a patient God, way beyond our patience. And Father, you have indeed engineered it so that there shall be by faith and faith alone a conversion of a people who now recognize you as Jesus the Messiah, not some other hoped for Messiah. That has come, O Lord, and bless them with great words and great presence, and to instill in them over 1,000 years a wishful desire to believe in you and give up, first of all, the bloody idolatry, which was pretty well consummated early in this process, but also all the other abominations that hung over the land of the people of Israel. that we even today still see. Father, as you perfect in them that which is great and marvelous, the rest of the world will lose its anti-Semitic wishes and desires, and will desire that which Israel has, and will be given alien status as if birthright to the land, to also be called together, to be indeed true children of God and inheritors of his promise. Father, how you do these things beyond our fondest imagination. Let us not wander too far from your word and become corrupted. For we see the corruptions boiling up in the churches of today, and they are from Satan, they are not from your word. Spare us that, we pray, as we close this session this day. In Jesus' name, amen.